All right, we're probably ready to get started, Rebecca.
Okay. Let me see if I can share screen. Tell me if you see it. All right.
Yep.
Very good. Okay, so I appreciate everyone's time. Today we're going over incident reports. I have also brought my coworker Patrick Campbell, who can assist as we go through. But our agenda today is going to be I'll go through some housekeeping things. We're going over basically incident reports and rules. So I encourage you to pull out the incident report that you're using or that you plan to use. We will go through the rule requirements. We want to make sure that those are in line so you don't receive citations. So if you pull that out now, have that ready to go. When we get there, you'll be prepared. We're going to look at why a good incident report is needed. When do you need to fill one out? We have some scenarios for you, practical guidelines, and then we'll go through notifications, which is muddy. There's a lot of nuance with notifications and the timeframes for submitting. So if there are any questions along the way, just stop me. You can drop questions in the chat. We'll try to answer that as we go. And I think that's it. Let's get started. So it's important to have an incident report. Again, that is the trigger for all of our UIs and MUIs. When we have an incident, we have to write up an incident report in the rule. And you want those to be well written, whether you're the one writing it up or you have staff in the home who are completing that. It's important that they're done well, because when they come back to you, there might be questions, there might be holes. A lot of times I'll look through UI logs later. It'll be 3 months later down the road, and I'll ask for that incident report. If I have a lot of questions, it's often hard to go back and go back 3 months to figure out what was happening and try to address whether we missed any MUIs in there or what's going on. So you want that for your record to be thorough so you can address things timely. We want our individuals to be healthy and safe. And if you miss something that was just not there, you didn't ask the right questions or didn't send those in, then it's important, I guess, to be on top of those as they're coming in or as you're writing them, make sure that they're done well. Secondly, this is full size. Yeah, I sure can. How about that? Better? All right. Okay. So secondly, this is a legal document. We do have cases that go to court. They're seen by lawyers and judges and police. So we want this to be a good representation of your agency, as well as our field as the whole. You want it to answer all the questions that might be existing there. So we'll go through some tips. Again, here, this is our process for UI and MUI, unusual and major unusual incidents. They all start with what happened, and that will trigger an immediate action and an incident report. So I want to go through those definitions really quickly for you. The MUI, you should have this training annually. This is an alleged, suspected, or actual occurrence of an incident outlined in the rule. There are 19 categories: abuse of all varieties, neglect, misappropriation or theft, exploitation, death, prohibited sexual relations, which is a consensual relationship between an individual and their staff that is prohibited, rights code violation, attempted suicide, medical emergency like CPR or something along those lines, Heimlich, missing individual, peer-to-peer acts, significant injury, law enforcement when our individual is charged, incarcerated, arrested, or tased, any unanticipated hospitalizations, and unapproved behavioral supports. So again, we go through the specifics in the annual MUI training. If you have any questions when these come up, just give me a call and we're happy to answer those. Another category that requires an incident report is an unusual incident. And this is just something that's a break in your routine operations, policies, procedures. Maybe the plan wasn't followed. The rule does outline 10 categories that are required to have an incident report. And those are as follows: injuries, falls, ER visits, And we're looking at low-level peer-to-peer incidents, med errors, rights code, UBS, and program implementation errors. That's where the plan wasn't followed, but there's not a high risk to the person. So all of those trigger. So I have some scenarios. I do want you to unmute and answer. Do these require an incident report? Want your opinion. So our first scenario here, an individual fell and required 4 sutures to close a laceration to their arm. Does that require an incident report?
MUI.
So it does require an incident report. This would be a UI level because we're not to the 5 sutures, which one of the nuances of the rule, but it absolutely does require an incident report. What would be your next steps after you get this from one of your homes? Or if you're writing this up, what's our next step here?
Medical care and notifications.
Yep, immediate actions, notifications, and this will prompt you to do a UI investigation. So you're going to want to follow up on both the medical end of that. We talked about UI investigations last time, I know, but we're going to want to look into that fall. What caused the fall? Was it an environmental issue, a medical issue? So you're going to want to do some more digging into that, but it absolutely requires an incident report to start that investigation process. The next scenario, the individual said they were robbed last week when staff was not present. Someone they don't know took their wallet. Any thoughts on if that needs an incident report? I think this is pretty easy. Hopefully we all know that, yes, this would be a theft, right? This would be an MUI. You would need to make sure police are called immediately, that you're getting that report written and sent over. The next one, the individual's in the hospital for pneumonia. That's written in the plan to be addressed as a UI. Is that one that we need to write up an incident report for? I see the heads. Yes, yes. This is, as it mentions, it's a UI, so it does require an incident report. Okay, the next scenario, I see these all the time, so I wanted to throw this in. The individual is aggressive. They actually hit their staff. It caused a black eye to the staff and property damage to the staff's car. Does this require an incident report? I see some mixed response. This is actually so in the UI rule, there's not a behavior category for an incident report for an investigation. Without an injury to the individual, this would not necessarily need an incident report, but I encourage you to follow your UI policies. Per rule, this would technically be a behavioral documentation. It wouldn't need to go on that report. Now, you might need an accident report, which is a whole different thing for workers' comp if your staff are injured on the job. But as far as our MUI UI system, this is technically not a UI by rule definition. I have just a couple more. The individual claims that the staff person will not take them to church on Sundays. Does that require an incident report? I see blank stares. So do our individuals have the right to go to the church of their choice or to worship in the way they wish? That's one of their fundamental rights. So this is going to be a rights violation if they're not allowed to do that. If they're claiming that staff is not taking them and they want to go, that would require an incident report and an investigation. As is, I'm looking at this as a UI. It would get bumped up to an MUI level if the person became so upset because their rights were violated that they placed themselves at harm. So let's say they bashed their head against the wall, they had some sutures that they needed because of the violation of rights. That would bump that up to the MUI level. If there's no response or they go sulk in their room, that's going to be a UI level. It still requires an incident report. It still requires an investigation. We want to make sure that this is prevented, that they have their rights upheld. That's a kind of a tricky one. The last one, the individual engages in self-injurious behaviors. They bite their arms all of the time, and that's not unusual for the person. Would that require an incident report? I see kind of deer in headlights. This one is tricky because it depends. So if we go back to the UI slide, we'll see that we are required to fill out an incident report and do a UI investigation for minor injuries. So if they're biting to the point that they're injured, yes, that would need one. If they're biting, it's red, there's no breakage of the skin, no blood, you could probably do that on a behavior support documentation. Would you agree with that, Patrick?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the section, if you want to pull out your incident reports, or if you're watching this back later, this is a time to do that. You can kind of compare. Do you have anything else, Pat?
Well, just one that every now and then shows up for just reporting, whether it's an incident report or not, that had a few recent cases, is if someone makes an allegation, maybe it's to staff have done something, to them, either verbally or, physically, or something of that nature, but they kind of have a history in their plan of making false allegations. We always look at those to see if they're reasonable. Was the staff present? There's times that they aren't, but we do need to ensure those are reported and incident reports are filled out and that those are looked at each and every time. Just because it's in the plan, it doesn't really negate that we don't, look into them or report them. They make sure they're reported so that we can look at them to see if they reach an MUI level. But if not, making sure that it's at least at the UI level that we're looking at them and, after we've reported them.
Right. And if this is something that happens day after day after day, we can come together and kind of decide a protocol for that. But yeah, as is, we'll have people who make them every so often. Those do need to be reported and investigated to a certain level. So we'll look at the rule here for incident reports. I'll actually go to the next slide as we go through. This is a template that DODD provides. If you have adopted this as your own, that's fantastic. All of the required elements are on this. If you want to make your own, or your agency has made their own, that's fine too. You just have to make sure that, again, all the required elements are present. So we're looking for the individual's name and address, the date of incident, the location of incident, whether that's in the kitchen or in a hotel in Vegas. We've had that one. Lunchroom at work, you want to put the location down there. That's a required element. The description of the incident, that's going to be your narrative of what happened. Sometimes it's good to start with what was leading up to the incident. We have forms that show that, but the rule requirement is just a description. We need the injury, the date, or the type, and the location. And this particular form also has a little body chart on the back. That's handy, especially if you have staff who may not speak English as their first language and may get their body parts mixed up and things like that. You'll have a visual so you can verify that what the injury is. We have to have an immediate action. Again, that's the step that occurs right after the discovery or right after the incident. It could be calling 911, sending the person to the hospital, separating peers if there's aggression. It could be calling police and removing staff if there's an allegation of physical or sexual abuse. It could be just checking the person over for injury, providing basic first aid. There's a lot of things you can do there, but that is a required element to our report and to your step in the process. The name of the PPI, this one gets confused an awful lot. It is a space there. That doesn't mean that you always need a name. So in the DD MUI world, the PPI is our primary person involved. It's our perpetrator. So we're looking at a name there if you have an allegation of abuse or neglect or theft. We're looking for the person who is alleged to have done this to the individual. So if you have a random hospitalization or a law enforcement or a missing person, that could be an NA, not applicable if there's no perpetrator in this incident. Witnesses, you want to list out names. Unless it's another individual, then you want to use initials or some other identifier. The notification section in Butler County, we have seen a lot of citations because these notifications are not done thoroughly. They're not documented. So we'll go through more specifically who needs to be notified and what kind of case, give you some tips there. But for now, just know that's a required element. You do need to complete that and make sure that you're putting the name of who you're notifying, their title, the date, and the time. Lastly, any further medical follow-up is required along with the printed name and signature of the person filling out the report. Okay, some tips that we have when either you're filling out this report or your staff are. This is maybe something you can take back to them in your training during orientation, or if you're seeing issues, you can share this with them. So the person with the firsthand knowledge of the incident should be the one completing the report. If you have multiple staff in the home and you have one person sent out to the hospital, obviously we don't need 3 incident reports. They can discuss among themselves who's going to fill out that report. If you have an allegation that was witnessed, maybe 2 staff saw another staff do something, we want a statement from both of them, but they can talk amongst themselves. Have one of them fill out the report and have the second one do a witness statement. That can be as simple as a piece of paper with their name, the information they saw, the date, their signature. That would suffice for that. We also have witness statement forms that are a little more formal, proper. So if you need any of those, just ask and we can send those your way. Number 2, we need the key elements of the information. So the who, what, where, when, and how. We want to know what's going on here. We don't want to use vague language. We want to be specific, but that's another point. So just make sure it's thoroughly completed. You understand what's happening. You read it back and it makes sense to you. Number 3, write in simple past tense and first person. This is my recommendation. Just so it's clear, I'll read reports all the time that flip back and forth between tenses, and it's just a little bit confusing. So again, reread it back, make sure it makes sense. This example here, Hank Hill, saw Bobby take a $20 bill from Peggy's purse. It's very clear. I know who's involved. And yeah. Number 4, you want to identify all people by name. If you have staff in the home, it's good for us to see their full names if they're witnesses. Again, if there are other individuals on this report, you don't want to put their full name. You want to use initials or some other identifier. Just for HIPAA purposes, the report you're writing goes in that person's file, so you don't want their guardian to see other people's names and things like that. But if you have a neighbor, if you have family, if you have somebody else involved, it's good if you have their full name to get that over to us, especially if they're the named perpetrator, the primary person involved. 5, it's a good idea to use quotations, especially if the individual is telling you what someone told them or a conversation they had. It's just a stronger report when you use their actual words instead of kind of paraphrasing. Sometimes that softens what's happened. Maybe the individual saying someone cursed them out and giving you the whole expletive. Sometimes that's a little more helpful for us to decide whether this is a verbal abuse versus whether the staff was frustrated and not really threatening them. Anyways, use quotations when you can. Number 6, you want to report in chronological order. Sometimes I think this means just pausing before you put the pen to paper to think about how you're going to order this. Start at the beginning and go through. We've seen a lot of reports where they're just hastily done and they start in the middle and they go to the beginning and then they go to the end, and it's just very confusing. So the example here, when Pat got up this morning, not you, Pat, he said he didn't feel well. Pat went to the bathroom. He called me a few minutes later. I went to the bathroom, found him on the floor. This might continue. He was responsive. I called 911. He was admitted. But we're just telling the story as it laid out. Number 7, you want to be specific. We see some reports with vague language. The person was mean to me. Linda was acting crazy. If you go back in 3 months and you're not the staff who wrote this, you're looking for what happened, you're not going to be able to tell exactly what happened with this. So be as specific as you can and describe what the person was saying or doing instead of kind of, again, paraphrasing. 8, you want to write only the facts and not your opinion. There is a place for your opinion. We do want to know that. If you're an agency, I know you want to know the opinions of your staff if they think that something actually did happen because they have a good reason. However, the incident report is not necessarily the place to do that. So Sue told me Robert yelled at her. I think he probably did yell at Sue. I've heard him yell at his kids. That's unrelated. We want to keep this a legal document specific to Sue we do want the staff's opinion on Robert. And if you're an agency, I know you want to deal with him yelling at his kids on the phone. That's a whole separate matter. 9, you want to write legibly, make sure that others will be able to read and understand what you're saying. I have seen a lot of chicken scratch and had to send it back. And, you can catch that on your end. If you know that you can't write very neatly, it's probably good to type those up. And then lastly, make sure that there's no missing information. It's filled out thoroughly. I have a frequently asked question here. So what if there are multiple individuals involved in an incident? A couple examples, if we have a day program with 10 individuals bringing in $10 so they can go to some event, that money goes in an envelope in the office. The envelope it disappears. So I'm going to have a misappropriation on behalf of 10 individuals. So I'm going to need an incident report for each individual person. And there are some reasons for that, but one being the notifications are specific to that person. That guardian could request that incident report. So we don't want a bunch of names. You don't want to go back and redact. We want to make sure everyone's guardian was notified. It's just much cleaner to do separate reports when there is a group like that. The other time is a peer-to-peer incident where there's maybe an aggressive peer and a victim peer. Those are going to be separate as well. If you are including information about the other person, make sure you use initials for any references. You don't want to put full names. Again, because these reports can go into different case files. They can be sent out to the guardian or requested. So we want to keep it clean. You want to make sure the notifications are for the person whose report this is, and the injuries are specific. So if we have a peer-to-peer where Robert, the peer, hits Susie, he leaves a large bruise on her arm. Her report is going to reflect that bruise in the injury section. And let's say he was not injured, so his report is going to reflect no injuries to him. You might note in the narrative that she had a bruise, but as far as the injuries, the body cheat, there's going to be no injuries because it's reflected of him. Does that make sense? Okay, here's a sample from DODD. This is for Betty White. It's just to show you this is thoroughly filled out. The description is fantastic. It follows all of the tips. We're writing in chronological order. We're using some quotes. We're using first person, past tense. It's very cleanly written. In this one, Betty was eating her cereal. She fell. She said she was just dizzy. This would be a UI level incident. You'll see the notifications are completed. And there's even a section down here where the day program was notified. And they wrote in here, they left a message. Sometimes it's helpful to show the method that you used to notify so that in case the state comes back and wants that verification, you can say, well, I emailed it. So it's right here. You can pull up that email and show that you did notify. The back, again, very thoroughly completed. And you can look at that. So we'll send that out later. Are there any questions so far where we are? Yeah.
One,
it's pretty.
sorry, just
go ahead.
one comment on the, I don't know, just popped up in my head about sometimes filling out an incident report of when to do when is every now and then we will get a complaint either submitted, anonymously or from the state or from another provider or family member, but it's related to, say residential provider, but they didn't receive this directly. This is a time sometimes, that we will ask for the residential provider to fill out the incident report in this matter because it is, something that you need to address if it's that type of, if it's a complaint scenario or if it's, an allegation that occurs, even though you didn't receive it firsthand. I was just trying to think of sometimes that when, well, I didn't have this or didn't receive this directly, why do I have to fill out an incident report? So I'm just trying to think of scenarios or things that sometimes are odd or, people
Right.
have questions on.
And in those cases, I would make as if you're the one filling out the incident report, make sure that it's thoroughly done. You're doing all your notifications and everything.
And normally you just say, you were reported from the county board, reported
Right.
this to us. And then, that gives you the opportunity to follow up and have your opinions and your investigation on there as well.
Right. Yes, thank you. So notifications, this is where it gets a little bit muddy because it's a little different between MUI and UI and sometimes different between agency and independent. So hang with me, we'll try to get through this. For MUIs, the notification needs to be done when the provider has responsibility for the individual. These notifications must be done the same day of the MUI or the discovery. So if you go in this afternoon and an individual tells you that they were robbed 3 weeks ago, today would be your discovery date. If this is the first you're hearing of it, the first any of your staff know of it, today is your discovery date. So today prompts you to notify the law enforcement and all these other entities. And those required entities are as listed below: the Guardian, the SSA, other providers of service, and staff or family who are living with the individual and responsible for their care. So those have to be done, again, the same day. If you learn of something at 11:30, I think there's probably some grace if it's at the very end of the day. But I don't know, sometimes they're sticklers. So be sure that your staff know to get that information to you. If you're an agency, get that to you as soon as possible so that we can make sure those notifications are done the same day. If it's a criminal case, that report to law enforcement needs to be done immediately in the jurisdiction where it occurred. So if someone's at day program and they come home and they say, I was at my program in Cincinnati and something criminal happened, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're making a phone call or going down to that jurisdiction to notify the law enforcement. Not always convenient, but that is part of our rule. You do want to document the time, date, and the name of the person who was notified. If I had that case where they're saying something happened at the day program, my first call would probably be to the day program to make sure that they're aware of it. Maybe they did hear of it, they did make that notification, and that'll save you a trip. If you serve anyone under the age of 21, we do have the mandate to report any allegation of abuse or neglect to Children's Services. Again, it's not in the rule, but I would document the time, date, and the name of the person that was notified. I put our county agency's number down there so you can have easy reference to that. Okay, as far as notifying the county board, the requirements in the rule are that we need to be notified immediately, but no later than 4 hours after the discovery of an MUI. And this could differ county by county on how they want that to come in. So I'll give you Butler counties here in a second. But for all of these specific categories, for accidental or suspicious death, for exploitation, misappropriation or theft, prohibited sexual relations, again, that is a consensual relationship between a client and their staff, peer-to-peer acts or abuse, either physical, verbal, or sexual, either of those categories, neglect, or if Channel 12 calls you up on an open case you have, you want to notify us immediately, no later than 4 hours. Here in Butler County, we ask that you make a verbal report, a phone call to us. During the business hours, you can call me. Conversely, I know my phone rings off the hook often, so if you send me an email and I respond back, that will suffice. After hours or on the weekend, if you become aware of an MUI, one of those categories, peer-to-peer abuse, neglect, any of those, you still have 4 hours. So that's why we give you our on-call line. That is for, so you can meet that requirement for reporting those. So we not only encourage that, it's very important that you use our on-call system, even if it's in the middle of the night and you don't want to bother anyone, your clock is ticking on certain reports.
Yeah, just a comment for, the email, we've had issues rarely, but every now and then in the past where someone sends something in notification, but it was, oh, please see attached, and the attachment wasn't there, and it was late on a Friday, and it was an allegation of physical abuse. So this was something that was sent in that became a reporting issue, a citable issue, because they had not, ensured that contact was made. That's why we really want the verbal kind of contact so that we can, clarify and try to avoid those. I know they're sometimes very rare, but we, don't want them to happen. And every now and then they do. And sometimes it's at just common, we'll email everything in, and sometimes that doesn't work or get through. Or
right. If it is after hours, we're not monitoring our emails, so that will not count, you will be late on that report if it's a required immediate notification. So do use our on-call system after hours. Again, if you hear back from me, that's fine. If you don't, give me a call. And sometimes I do take off, so people cover my phone. So you may be sending an email to me. I try to put my out of office message on, but just make sure that we did receive that. The rule does specify sometimes when we don't need to make a notification. These are exceptions, not the rule. But if, let's say you have a guardian who's accused of misappropriation, obviously you want to bypass notifying the guardian of this allegation. We don't want them to be given an opportunity to cover up or, handle that in a way that would impede in our investigation. So we're not going to notify them or their spouse or significant other if they are a required person that we're supposed to notify. If the notification could jeopardize the health or welfare of the individual, this is case by case, and you're going to want to document why you bypassed that, and the state's going to want to agree with you, or the compliance department, they're going to need to agree with you on that cause. So make sure that you do that sparingly, but there are times when that's necessary. So we can bypass that notification and just document why. If that person reported to you, let's say the SSA gave you a call and said, this is what's going on, we need an incident report, then obviously you don't need to hang up and then call them back to meet your notification. That was it. And lastly, on a death, if the family's already aware, we definitely don't need to disrupt them in their time of grief. Okay, now we're switching gears to UIs. These are the 10 categories: the falls, the ER visits, the lower level risk incidents. So it is different between independent providers and agency, but independent providers, you need to notify the guardian and you need to forward the incident report to the SSA on the first working day following discovery. So if you're working this afternoon and something occurs, the person falls down, they scrape their knee, we're not going to get to an MUI level with that. We do need an incident report. You need to notify the guardian, and then that report needs to be sent to the SSA by tomorrow. For agencies, you are the keeper of these records. And we'll get to that later. But okay, so when an unusual incident occurs with you, you need to notify other providers of service as necessary. You'll note there's not really a lot of specifics. And again, if you're an agency, I would encourage you to kind of keep a consistent notification policy. It's up to you to create that. But I would probably, best practice would be to mimic the MUI notifications, just because sometimes something is, you're not clear on whether it's going to be a UI or an MUI. And so if you treat it as a UI, you don't do those notifications, but then however it winds up being filed, that could come back to bite you because you didn't do the proper notifications. I hope that makes sense, but that's up to you. The rule is pretty vague on UI notifications. But again, you want to make sure that your staff know the difference between a UI and MUI, or whoever's doing these notifications is very clear on that. Okay, any questions on notifications?
I was just
Yeah.
curious if Butler County, like the SSA department, has like a consistent response on that, or we try to preferably do notification for all incidents, but I wasn't sure if it was like standardized within Butler County.
So as far as like calling the SSA to let them know, if they send that over to me, is that what you're asking?
No, just to the SSA team, if they kind of try to standardize that.
That I'm not sure of. Pat, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not entirely, I know that, working with and some, that's one time that I asked, I mean, do you get all the incident reports or not? And I know that some teams ask for them, the providers, please send me everything. And I know that some SSAs don't get them, but I don't know if it's because they didn't ask for them or, they just haven't had that conversation with the provider. So I don't think it's like standard, it's not, I don't see it in every like ISP, in the plans that you're required to send them, but I know they ask a lot, and sometimes that's just standard procedure, either even from the provider. They just want to ensure that, hey, an extra set of eyes are reviewing this, that I didn't miss something, and that's perfectly fine. I don't think there's an issue ever sending them, to the SSA, so that they're aware of things, so that, you're always ensured that communication and the team's aware, that could be done as they happen, or, monthly. So I do see it, and, kind of spread out, but I would say the majority do get them. But there are times that they don't.
Well, very strictly speaking, there's a difference between a notification and sending over the report. Sometimes that does, overlap, I would say, because if you send the report over, that would be a notification. But notifications are more of a phone call, email. I guess you could send the report and consider that your notification. If they receive those, we're working with them on kind of a process of what they need to do with that. Again, we'll get to incident reports, your process as an agency, what needs to happen there. But yeah, it's not clear because it's not really clear in the rule that that's a requirement for UIs.
No, that's
So,
fine.
yeah.
It does help. Thank you.
Okay.
I mean, we know in the rule, I don't know if it's in here, that, the requirement is, once you identify as a provider that there's a trend, that's when the team needs to be aware. So again, some people do that to say, oh, well, I've sent everything, but that doesn't always, well, you do still have to make sure there's that monthly monitoring to identify the trend, and that's reported separately. So yeah, it's kind of, that's everything in between is kind of done, but that's the, what the rule states, because there has been times we get nothing from a provider except, when a trend occurs, and, maybe annually, that when they're reviewing them. So we've had kind of everywhere in between. So yeah, it's really that, working out with the SSAs in those team meetings, what the expectation is.
Right. And that kind of transitions nicely to when to submit an incident report. Again, if that's part of your notification process and your UI policy is to notify the SSA, and that could be part of your UI policy. But in the rule, it's a little different. So our notifications, again, those are happening same day. Submitting the incident report for MUIs, that's required by 3 p.m. the next working day. So we give you time to do the paperwork, to ensure those immediate actions, make sure that people were notified, and go through your internal process. But we do need the MUI incident reports by 3 p.m. So if something happens this afternoon, I'll need that report 3 p.m. tomorrow, or sooner, preferably. So for submitting an unusual incident, this is where it gets a little dicey, because it depends on if you're an independent or an agency. An independent, if you have an unusual incident, again, those 10 categories, the fall, the ER visit, the low-level incidents, you need to notify the guardian and forward your report to the SSA on the first working day following the day the UI is discovered. Again, remember, MUI is 3 p.m. the next working day, UI is the next working day. There's no time frame between the two. For agencies, you are the holder of these records. It is not required for you to submit any UI incident reports except upon request by the county board. I know there are some counties that do request that you send in all UIs, and that's their request. Butler County is not one of these. If you have a good filter system, if you have a good way of determining what's a UI versus what's an MUI, and you're confident that what you're holding onto is a UI and doesn't need to come to us, then again, like Pat said, we're just going back to, you need to track for trends and patterns, do your UI investigation. When it hits that trend and pattern level, that's when you need to report to the SSA. But again, your UI policy might be a little different than the rule. It might be above and beyond, so we encourage you to follow that policy. Clear as mud, yeah. But that is all I have. Pat, do you have any other thoughts, any questions? We're happy to answer those, to try to answer those.
No, we're, if you can't get a hold of Becca, and I know it happens, you can call any of us if you happen to know or have been involved in a MUI. So if there's trouble getting a hold of someone, you can report or call the main number and ask for an IA, and we can take those reports if there's some reason that you can't get a hold of somebody through the normal process.
Okay, I see in the chat someone was having a hard time hearing. Maybe you can try to play this back later and see if that improves. If you have any questions on incident reports, just call me and I will answer all of your questions, walk you through what you need to do. And again, Kathy has dropped the training certificates in the chat, so do get that. You get an hour of training for this session. And if there's no further questions, I think we'll go ahead and dismiss. You guys can leave. I'll hang out a few more minutes if there's any questions. But you guys have a great day. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And we'll see you back in March for our general overview of the MUI process. So,
Thank
yeah.
you.